I am very pleased to introduce Isabella Wojcik. And Isabella is the Director of House Programming for the nonprofit James Beard Foundation. I'm sure you're all at least vaguely familiar with the James Beard Foundation. Your initial impression is probably around awards and around scholarships and some of the things that James Beard is perhaps best known for. What I have learned in talking with Isabella, and I think she'll share, is that the spectrum of their influence and the spectrum of the way they touch the food industry is so much bigger and broader than that. For example, part of Isabella's role is organizing more than 200 events per year at the historic James Beard House right here in New York. At the other end of the spectrum, James Beard and Isabella are involved with the U.S. State Department in a diplomatic culinary program. So promoting peace through food, I just find fascinating. So we're very, very pleased to have you here. Thank you for coming. Since we're focused somewhat on a branding discussion, I'm going to throw you a softball to start with. Tell us about the James Beard brand. What is it?
So first, thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. And it's such a pleasure listening to all the speakers. This is so fascinating. So what's interesting to me is when you say the word James Beard, it means different things to different people. And certainly of a generation past, it may have meant either taking cooking classes with him, reading his cookbooks. For a lot of chefs and consumers that are foodies, it means maybe Beard Awards, maybe dining at the Beard House. But everyone's got a vague sense, and they've heard that name, even if they don't know what it means. And we definitely credit food media and media in general for promoting that name. So essentially the brand, I mean, it all started at the James Beard House. This is a historic townhouse. I encourage you to visit, dine there, come say hi and have coffee with me in the morning or have dinner at night. But essentially it was a place where James Beard lived. So who is James Beard? Who was a foremost food authority, a teacher, a mentor, and somebody who is credited with two kind of big ideas that we take for granted these days. Essentially, since he was born and raised in Portland, Oregon, came to New York to pursue performance art, and when that didn't work out, the culinary art seemed to be this fallback, and teaching was very much his métier at the Beard House. He's credited by the foundation that started after he passed away to save that very same house I just mentioned. Two big ideas. One is the way that he grew up, his mother ran a boarding house, and the way that he was raised, and the way that his love of food, his lifelong passion for knowledge, all about it, and appreciation for the taste of it stemmed from this idea that you should eat whatever grows and is raised near you and in season, and simple as that. And the other thing, and I'll get more to that topic again, but the other thing that he's really renowned for in his writing, so he wrote over 25 cookbooks, countless articles, taught classes, and represented products. I mean, he was always never far from bankruptcy, so he was always writing the next article, kind of hawking the next product, which ended up being a new technology, Cuisinart, for example, or cooking with European spirits. But he codified the idea that America had its own cuisine, and it wasn't, highways and hamburgers. It was a beautiful national cuisine, but the vast country was represented in regions. So it's a regional cuisine, and those regions, then when you get to the heart of it, are really the bounty of that local land, the people, so the immigrant groups and the locals that have left behind, their own stories, their own foodways and recipes. And so this was this grand American cuisine that he identified. He operated in the 50s, 60s, 70s. He passed away in 1985. So his response in his teachings about staying in the kitchen, cooking, sharing that food with the people you love, stemmed in response to sort of this advent of highway systems, processing food, being driven across vast distances. And the message that was being sent to housewives, essentially, is that, get out of the kitchen as fast as you can, use all these wonderful processed products because they're safer. You can rely on them year-round. The science in them makes them more nutritional, not just safer. And who wants to cook? Just get out and enjoy yourself and be part of your family life. What James Beard taught was the importance of staying grounded in the kitchen, cooking and sharing that. And it didn't have to be a fine cuisine. It could be the most rustic, simple, ethnic dish. It could be a sandwich. But as long as it was a sum of really wonderful ingredients first, and that importantly you shared it with people at the table rather than running off somewhere. These are the kind of lifelong lessons he was trying to instill in his students. And when he passed away, that townhouse, that Beard House on West 12th Street, was so recognized as this center for conversation and food tastings that it seemed a shame to lose it. So that was 1985 when he passed away. In 1986, it became this center for food conversation, the center for food where food happens. So now we fast forward to today, and what the foundation's goal initially was just to set up the house, have some fundraisers to preserve it, and it quickly emerged as a showcase for chefs. And chefs in those days were not recognized, certainly not by name. The profession of the culinary arts was not recognized as an art form. So the initial goal was really to put the culinary arts in the realm of the art world, to recognize chefs as those artists, and to really inspire the next generation of, at that time, very privileged diners. But what's grown out of the Beard House itself, and it still is a performance space for chefs. So over 200 days a year, there's somebody telling their story, their region's story, their national story in food. But beyond that, it's culinary scholarship, so mentoring the next generation of cooks and restaurateurs. Awards are coming up for us. They'll be staged in Chicago. Last week in April in New York, the Media Journalism Awards, and then first Monday in May in Chicago, the Chef and Restaurant Awards. So that's industry recognition. But beyond scholarships, culinary arts events, and the awards, we've entered kind of the next arena for us. Because as a foundation, we're very much known for fine food, fine dining. And it seemed like a wonderful thing to create a national understanding and appreciation for what it takes to put this kind of fine food on a table. But these days, chefs have moved beyond just the role of the artists. And as we're kind of talking today, consumers have moved beyond just, I think we're still thinking of the conscious consumer as somebody who has access through resources, through education, through kind of a position in life and society to make these kinds of choices, which we know there's a vast globe of people that don't even enter this part. But we as a foundation are recognizing that for us to be relevant in the food space, we have to look at food systems, we have to look at nutrition, and all the issues that people are thinking about, that chefs and restaurateurs are thinking about. And we also understand that the role of the restaurant has also changed from just a place of, to feed people and a business to maybe a place to be entertained. And now it's seen as kind of the center of the community spirit. And chefs are seen as kind of upholders of that community. Mostly because they're so trusted, they've become national brands, they're recognizable, they wear their white jacket, and it conveys a sense of authority and a sense of trust. But they also felt the need to be more informed on how their restaurant and their business, just beyond their own business model, how that has a role in the community and what change they can affect. So we've moved into food advocacy, food system work. Just as I mentioned, as a foundation, we felt in order to be relevant and have a role, it couldn't just be the celebration. It needed to be the food system work. So what that means is food conference, boot camp training for chefs to be advocates, and our work with the State Department, both in diplomacy around the world, but also starting in May at the U.S. Pavilion at the World's Fair, which is Expo Milano, from May to October.
Right. So I'm going to ask you the same question you asked the journalist. To what extent do you feel like the Beard Foundation is sort of leading some of these trends, and to what extent does it just sort of reflect and build on trends that are in the food culinary arts?
I find that our role has shifted, and it started with putting putting chefs front and center, and these were not known people. So with the help of technology, certainly food media, they have become national, regional, and international icons. So we started with the chefs and identified them as these are kind of the performers. With their celebrity comes that recognition by the consumer that these are the people, either because they're because of what they craft in their restaurants are so fabulous, or because of the kind of work that they do on social issues, and so we're kind of we started that trend in terms of portraying the power that the chefs have, and are very much benefiting when it comes to the diners, embracing the chef and recognizing their contributions. But now, we sort of fell into the realm of followers as well before the food conference and all of the food policy work that we're engaged in, because it was still addressing a small, finite group of people in a very kind of fine setting, and that has a role and a place at the table, but that's not the whole table.
Yeah, so let me follow up on that. That's a very interesting thought. So if James Beard, at least historically, has been sort of that, the apex of the food pyramid, to use a bad analogy, how does that flow down through? How does what happens at your level or with those premier chefs and premier dining organizations filter down through all of the common folk like me?
So, the Beard Awards are extremely exclusive. There's one winner. How many chefs and restaurants can you think of in this U.S., Puerto Rico, et cetera, or food writers, journalists, media that cover it? The Beard House has 200 dinners. So again, more inclusive, but still such a small number. But what happens is, it's the chefs that come and cook at the Beard House or wherever they're engaged with us at events around the country. And it's the relationship that they have with the media to tell that story. And that becomes a story regionally, and that has huge impact because suddenly you have a community of people who may not know or care about New York and the Beard House, but their local chef, their regional chef is doing something in New York, which says so much about their community, since chefs are also the ones who will bring local products, producers, and put kind of a spotlight on the industries that are going on. There's a sense of, importance in our community. So I think that's where you get, foodies following us certainly and being aware of food trends and sort of the wonders of food. But then you get the regional media that has deep impact on local consumers that may not even be able to afford these kind of experiences.
And let me ask you then as well, so then sort of taking that to the next step, if you will, as we acknowledge, there's a lot of major food brands, a lot of food companies. So to what extent does that then impact, maybe products that they may be selling, 2 years from now? Or what advice might you give them in terms of how to look at food trends and things that happen at a James Beard level and bring that into a,
Well, first I wanted to
store?
let everyone know, we're a non-for-profit foundation. So a lot of our, the way that we do business is through corporate partners and sponsors. So internally, we do have relationships with companies, and it can't always be just that one fine artisanal producer because they may not have the volume or the resources to be a partner. And certainly that's very much true of the U.S. Pavilion, which, just to talk about the World's Fair, every pavilion, every nation's pavilion is paid for by the government except for the U.S. Pavilion. So it has to be, a balancing act between creating a pavilion that represents American innovation, technology, and kind of who we are and how we want to be seen in the world versus how we have been seen. But it also means someone has to pay for it. So it's been interesting. In terms of thinking about companies, chefs, consumers, so certainly what I'm seeing a lot is chefs are dictating a lot of the trends. So it starts in a small restaurant outlet. It starts with one chef. An ingredient becomes trendy, a sort of a recipe, a technique, a thing, a food becomes trendy. And then suddenly there's the innovation happens at the big company level. So flavor is an influencer, technique or a certain kind of product. Or copying. We mentioned Cronut earlier, which was a cultural phenomenon that was very unexpected. But I'm seeing Dunkin' Donuts selling its own version of a croissant nut or whatever they're calling it. So that's my feeling. My feeling is the chefs, start dictating the kind of a message that percolates on a national level. And it's very much through companies that feel as if they have to be in line with what consumers are thinking about. And I think what consumers are thinking about is very much coming through the media.
I could sit and talk to you all day, but that would be stingy. Any questions from the audience? Anybody have a question that you'd like to address?
And certainly social media. I mean, this is such an exciting time. I mean, Ed talked about kind of the internet being noisy and messy, but you know, we've become so obsessed with images, and I definitely see it on Instagram as sort of like following Twitter, because a picture says so much, but then you also have unlimited text. And so I'm seeing chefs using it as a tool to kind of create their own visual imagery, but I'm seeing diners taking so many pictures of moments and food and drink, you know, experiences.
Any questions from the audience? We have one up here.
Well, tying in a little bit to the first panel, you know, we talked about the complexity of the supply chain, and I'm just curious from the chef's perspective, you know, how are they holding themselves and their supply chain accountable for some of the environmental and social challenges that might be inherent of sourcing and ingredients?
I'm finding that chefs are very challenged, actually, because, you know, they're in a business that has a high failure rate. So you're constantly worried in sort of a micro setting about just the health of your business. And then you start to think about the issues that everyone is talking about and how you contribute, whether it's environmental issues around your business, whether it's your food supply, the source of your ingredients, labor laws, how to pay for the well-being of your employees. It's a very stressful environment to also try to be an artist and create and innovate. So that's the kind of realm of the chef, but they feel very responsible. The national conversation is my food healthy and nutritious for my consumer? Is it an artistic expression of what I want to do? Where is it sourced? Is it supporting a local or small business? These are huge concerns that they have, and the success to which they can identify smart sources for their products, you know, the right kind of businesses to be aligned with. The success of that really depends on the size of their business, where they're located in the country, and the kind of business model they have. I mean, are they a small, independent restaurant? You know, quick service, not a huge volume place, kind of a local, or is it the big established, you know, multi-location restaurant? One of the things that we're doing, which is a program called Boot Camp for chefs. It is a retreat for about 14 or 15 chefs, so it's small in scope, for about 3 days, where we bring in experts on some issue of advocacy in the food system, whether it's, you know, antibiotics in dairy, sustainable farmed versus wild fishing. And it's a retreat where they can bond quickly, but are given initial training on how to think about these ideas, how to be advocates and activists, how to stand up to a local or national or regional or state government, how to identify the people that they can talk to. But more so than that, once they graduate, they're really alumni of the Chef Action Network, which is this behind-the-scenes sort of referral and resource network. So that's one way that we're targeting the chefs, understanding that they don't have all the experience. They're new at this. This is a very new responsibility that a lot of them are feeling, and they need support and access to experts that can then help shape kind of, you know, what kind of campaigns they can do.
So I'm going to cheat, because when we chatted the other day, you told me an analogy that I'm going to ask you to bring up again, because I think part of the issue we've seen with things like conscious consumers, or I think maybe you call them enlightened eaters, is that I think people immediately go to extremes. Well, you have to be all natural. You can't eat food, you know, high calorie. And you gave me an example of a pastry chef based on the boot camp experience that was taking what I thought was a very interesting approach towards, you know, you know the okay.
Emily Lucchetti.
Yeah, please.
So Emily Lucchetti, one of, you know, for the hope is that these chefs will then think about what's important to them and the issues that are important to them in their community, and that they can affect change. So it can't be something that is just not even, you know, it's insurmountable. But one example that I gave you is a pastry chef in San Francisco, James Beard Award winner Emily Lucchetti. As a pastry chef, she feels like she suffers. People eat this wonderful meal at the restaurant, and then by the time they get to dessert, they just want to skip it. And in general, people are indulging, in her opinion, in the wrong kind of sweets. So from her perspective, and she wanted to kind of enact this campaign about eating better desserts, better for you, better made, in smaller amounts. So moderation and kind of well-crafted dessert. So this was an outcome of boot camp that she wanted to take on.
So my mother was right all along, and it's just small dessert. Any other questions from the audience? I see one in the back.
I saw that your bio said that you were a Cornell hotel grad, so as a
Yes.
fellow Cornellian,
Hello.
go Big Red.
Go Big Red, not
but-
Iowa.
Are you? Yeah, I was gonna say you're not from Iowa. What's up?
I'm not, but I wanted to ask you a question about the universities. How are we engaging food and plant science majors and agriculture and life science majors and those type, and hotel students about these issues of sustainability and healthy eating and consciousness?
An excellent question, because you speak about the people that are going to be the next wave of decision makers and advertisees and advertisers. So as a foundation, we have student memberships, and we're looking at, since we already host kind of panel discussions and salons where we can convene sort of local members of a community that are involved in policy, manufacturing, and food and nutrition and health and writing. We're looking at doing that on university campuses, because that kind of conversation, especially at that generation where they've come into adulthood, they're so passionate, they're very informed, they're technologically savvy, and they have that energy and that gusto to change the world right now. It's imperative. We're doomed, and they have to do something about it today. So as a foundation, we are definitely looking at ways to identify and work with students on campuses. But I would say also it's a prime audience for sort of companies to think about, and I'm sure there are lots of universities that are engaged with recruiters, but also various campaigns to look at how to foster that inquisitive mind, that passion, to maybe then do some effective advocacy work when they can. They're still early in their presumably in their youth and careers, that they can actually be effective.
I think there might. Go
Oh, sorry, but I was going to also say, not to continually refer to the U.S. Pavilion, because the World's Fair is really a 6-month run. But what's exciting is, so James Beard Foundation is really, when it started, it was just this grassroots group of volunteers who were either former students of James Beard or friend of James Beard. So it's remarkable to think of how far we've really come along. So the U.S. Pavilion has a big college student kind of docent component. There are about 150 students that are going to be working in that pavilion. They have to be multilingual and sort of culturally aware, but to sort of have that imprint and impact of young minds and kind of early in their education, but creating and shaping the shape of the visitors that are coming through the U.S. Pavilion. So that's very targeted and very immediate as a campaign, but that's what we're doing starting in May.
I think there may have been another question in the middle. Yes, please.
Increasingly becoming community centers, so it's less about going out to restaurants a few times a year to spend a ton of money and celebrate special occasions, and more about using restaurants in your daily life to sort of engage with the community. So what do you think is the future of really high-end fine dining, given that?
Well, so number one, I feel like a lot of this is driven also by the economy. Certainly in 2008, there was what I felt like a superfluous number of these fabulous places that all felt the same, and many of them just had to close. And chefs had to reinvent, but that's an immediate, a few years ago financial kind of wave, but that happens periodically. So chefs had to kind of reinvent how they view themselves within their own restaurants. And for a lot of them, it meant, sort of more approachable menus at more approachable prices, and many more events to engage the consumer, the diner, to build loyalty within that restaurant space or somewhere else, on their farm or in their pantry store, whatever they have. So what I'm seeing is this kind of shift and real estate prices certainly contribute to that. But what I'm seeing in chefs is a very creative shift to how you define the elite kind of fine dining and how you have that experience. I mean, there certainly will always be a certain number of more traditional, very formal kinds of eating spaces, but I'm seeing a lot more where the quality and the cost of the ingredient, the wines, the service, or the educated server, the educated and well-trained cook, but maybe the space is very casual, or maybe as a diner you're very uncomfortable. You're not seated in a very comfortable place. You're seated on uncomfortable furniture. Maybe you're in a bar and maybe it's noisy, maybe it's cold. But I'm seeing kind of fine dining go to places where at that level, at that price point, the chefs are still creating something new and artistic. But there's a huge middle section of places that are resonating with diners, where they represent kind of the farm to table and the rusticity, and you can identify who the farmers are and where your ingredients are from. And I think some of that shift is certainly due to an influence both from Spain and El Bulli, and kind of this very modernist cuisine where food was manipulated and shaped to really not even appear as the raw ingredients. So I'm seeing a lot of that kind of thinking, and the parallel path, that farm to table movement, I'm seeing that very much inspired sort of as a necessity by economy, a personal philosophical style where chefs are like, I don't really understand the modernist, I really want my carrot to look like my carrot. But also the next sort of global influencer is Denmark and this restaurant Noma and this concept of foraging. So that particular chef a number of years ago established this idea that he was only going to use ingredients within a very small sort of circumference of his place in Denmark, much of which is sort of cold, wintry, much of which is local sort of shrubbery and things that grow in the marshes and in the forest, but not really considered traditional ingredients. And he kind of had this manifesto, narrowed his scope, and really challenged himself and created this idea of foraging locally and really deeply. And that is a very big influence on chefs around the world, where now they're using that idea to look at, well, what do I have in my backyard? And James Beard just talked about this idea of, in his native Pacific Northwest, it was the shellfish, it was the blackberries, it was the mushrooms. But now we're talking about succulents and grasses and shrubs and insects. It's no surprise that Noma's also serving a dish that has ants, because insects are definitely very much kind of the next idea, a potential protein, very accessible, affordable, and there's some great global stories from countries, ranging from Asia to Africa, where insects are consumed and there are national dishes built around those. So when we're looking for the heritage and the story and things, chefs are considering that. So I'm seeing parallel paths. Sorry, I'm diverging to answer your questions about where fine dining is, and it's that places that will still be haute and traditional will still exist, but also there'll be there are these incredible palaces that are just very unconventional in terms of where we're getting our fine dining. But it's trickling down in terms of technique and the kinds of menus and ingredients to the masses, for sure.
We're bumping up against the clock, so maybe a real quick question? Yeah, one more real quick one.
Say the president of Cornell is from the University of Iowa. You guys know that, right?
Ken, is there a question in there
Yes,
somewhere?
the question is, what is the diplomatic initiative that you have, the culinary diplomatic initiative, that's so intriguing to me?
Thank you, sorry. So as a foundation, we have been the go-to kind of people about questions on chefs and food. And certainly the State Department has come to us a number of times to identify, help them identify chefs. So we've already had that periodic conversation relationship. But it was really Hillary Clinton, when she was the Secretary of State, who is a big foodie and kind of identified in her travels and experiences the role that food and understanding someone else's food and culture, the role that that can play in starting a dialogue and having them be open and receptive to whatever your message is. So it was her initial kind of thinking that this could be something more formal, and then Capricia Marshall, who's the chief of protocol, kind of put together the program. So this is now 2 years old. It's a culinary diplomatic partnership, and essentially we help the State Department identify about 130 chefs, ranging from chefs that are, independent restaurateurs to chefs that are in their own ambassadorial kind of portfolio, representing different regions, genders, nationalities, but essentially identifying a chef core. And then whenever these chefs have opportunities to travel, or whenever the State Department has needs, and they discovered that the idea of having a food-themed anything, a conversation, a cooking class, a demo, anything around the world, there is such a need, there's, pun intended, such a hunger for these kinds of programs, which then lead to higher attendance, which then lead to, all right, now let's talk about the issue that's important in this, city country. So this program is intended really to help chefs understand that role that they can play in adding to diplomacy, but also sharing American, it's really also kind of exporting the American message, which is so misunderstood, that there's an opportunity to really showcase heritage pigs, heritage stories, techniques, recipes, and what makes this country so, such an innovative food country.
It's like the Art and Embassy.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you had an American chef cooking a Thanksgiving meal in, somewhere, and kind of showing what that tradition and ritual was about, just as an example.
All right, thank you. Please join me in thanking Isabella for a very, very interesting discussion. If you don't mind sitting here for just a second. And if you would please give another round of applause to all of our panelists who gave their time very generously today. And if you will indulge me, there's a few people I'd like to recognize. As you can imagine, an event like this takes a tremendous amount of work to put together. So I'd like to thank Mary and Sophia and Alexa and Christina. I hope I didn't miss anybody. And thank all of you for coming. Again, I feel like we've got a launching pad for so much discussion and so much opportunity to address many of these issues. And I really appreciated the feedback that you gave us and some of the questions that came out today. Again, don't feel you have to rush off. We're going to be around for a while. We'd love to chat one-on-one with anybody who's interested. And with that, thank you very much for coming.